So I took my dress shoe down there and had them make a mold after my dress shoe and make a chocolate mold that was full size. And I had him put it in plexiglass. And I sent it to this guy. And this is the cliche of cliches. I said, I'm trying to just get my foot in the door. Will you please just talk to me for 5 minutes? Does this chocolate earn me 5 minutes? And I got a meeting with that.
Welcome to Pipelineology, the business-to-business podcast for agencies, consultants, coaches, and businesses looking to build a pipeline of hot prospects ready to buy their products and services. Never wonder where your next client is coming from. To learn more about our strategies, services, and for resources on building your sales pipeline, visit pipelineology.com. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Pipelineology. Got a very exciting episode for you today. I am pleased to be joined by the founder and partner at Gerson and Associates, Randy Gerson. Randy, welcome to the show.
Gary, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and this should be fun and entertaining. So thank you.
I'm looking forward to it myself. So I guess before we get into the interview here, could you just kind of give us a quick little bit about your background, your story, and then we'll get into more stories.
Sure, be happy to do that. Yeah. What a lot of people don't know about me, actually, I was born in downtown Los Angeles. So I'm a LA big city baby. The only bigger city would probably be New York at the time in the United States. And grew up in LA in Orange County, kind of watched it grow over time. Earlier in my career, I was actually an athlete. I played professional tennis for a super short, less than a year career, injured my knees, and that was like a flash in the pants now in my career. But people that maybe don't know that about me, but I do have an athletic background and still tend to stay in shape and participate in a lot of sports. But professionally, after that, I actually got into a sales career. So helped my parents build a business, did some operational things for them, but eventually my father decided I need to be in sales out in the field. And I got this really great sales training from him. You'll love this. He put a pitch book together, which was just samples of the materials that we created, a cover on it with the company's name, bought me a new suit at 24 years old and kicked me out the door and said, go sell. That was my training.
Oh boy.
So really zero training at all. He says, go out and talk to people. And he just gave me a list and said, go bang on door. That's literally was my sales training for my dad. And those that know my dad know that he's got a good gift for getting along with people. So he figured that I've got that gift from him and it should work out fine for me. Little did I know how difficult sales was going to be. Did I get some deals? Sure. I think on the pity of my father mentioning his name, a couple people signed some agreements and gave us business. But did I close some deals on my own? Maybe one, maybe two to my recollection. But now that I look back on it, it was a lot of charity case back then. And so not a great way, but very typical way that a lot of people start out in sales career. They have an expert personality and think, I could be in sales. It's good money. I enjoy it. I enjoy talking to people, but not so fast. Sales isn't that simple. From there, I actually left the company and really started my sales career. I landed a job at Xerox Corporation. This was back in their heyday. And those that want to look it up, Xerox was famous for winning an award, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But I started in sales there, got training from them. Xerox would not allow you to talk to a customer, even though you had a budget ticking over your head for the year, until you were fully trained, which took about 3 months. It's 7 to 8 weeks of full training, 2 weeks at a time. They ship you to their training center, which housed 6,000 students, 6 students to 1 teacher, video training, sales process, sales consulting training, math training, how to do contracts, negotiating skills, you name it, the whole 9 yards. It was the best of the best. I graduated from there after 3 months of having my budget tick over my head and put into practice what they had taught me. One thing I did notice, you'll love this, Gary, is I sat behind it. So think of a room that's got 100 salespeople in it, like a boiler room, because that's really what it looked like. It was a giant open room with chest-high cubicles. So you could see just barely over your eyeballs if you were tall enough. 100 salespeople, 10 sales reps per row, 10 rows across, one big giant square. You had 28 cubic feet that you sat in. This is before PCs or anything. We had one mainframe computer and an AS400 in another room. that you could go use the screen. Otherwise, you sat there with 3 stacks of yellow pages, phone books of businesses that you had to call on a telephone. That's how sales was at Xerox back in the day. And a lot of people can't imagine that. And so I sat at the desk, and the object is you were either dialing for appointments or you were out in the field being at those appointments. And so 3 cubicles up from me was a gentleman by the name of Bob. And to keep Bob anonymous, Bob was the #1 rep 17 out of 20 years in the country for Xerox, and happened to sit 3 cubicles up from me. Now, I know how lucky I got working for my dad. I know that I didn't close a lot of deals. I'm now freshly trained, thinking, okay, how do I use this training and how can I make my budget for this year? So I decided to burn another full month of my budget. Now this will be 4 full months, and travel with Bob in the field and find out, what does this guy do with the training that he got that made him #1 17 out of 20 years? What's different about Bob? And when you looked at Bob, he didn't look any different. Looked like every other sales rep. In fact, Bob looked like he had too many dinners here and there. And you're thinking, Bob's not in great shape, but God, he knows what he's doing. So I traveled with Bob. We made friends, and I found out what his trade secrets were and how well he was at making deals happen. And Bob utilized my skills from my previous business, the travel, to help him as well. So after working with the training, working with Bob, learning the skill sets, I then set out to actually do my territory with only 6 months left in the year to make the budget. The budget was about 800 and I think almost 900,000, like 892 or something like that was the budget for the year over the previous years. I ended up selling 1.2 million that year in that budget. And then the second and third year, I ended up selling up to 11.2 million by the third year in that territory. So it took a territory from 800 and some odd thousand, just under a million, to 11.2. You can imagine that at that point, I was the hero at Xerox. They wanted to say, what do you want to do next? And you'll really love this part of it. It's very interesting. I said I wanted to get out of sales. You could literally hear the pin drop in the room when I said that out of my mouth. There's 5 other executives in the room with the whole Western region. I was in the room with the Western region president and the VP and so forth, right? Looking for a position for me in their sales organization. And I say, I don't want to be in sales anymore. So after the dead silence that seemed like forever, it was probably only 10 seconds, but seems like forever. One of the executives asked me, well, what would you like to do? And that's when I opened my mouth and said, and you'll love this, Gary, I want to get into marketing. What respectful salesperson wants to get into marketing ever? Back then too, that was when sales reps said, marketing stinks. These leads are crap. They're horrible. And marketing said, these poor salespeople can't sell if their life depended on it. We're sending them these great leads. What's wrong with them? And so you had the big us and them and Xerox pointing to each other. And so me making that comment to my sales exec was like I was going to the other side. You could just see it on their faces. Without a lot much to do, I actually was placed on a 10-person team. After about a month of deliberation, they made me an offer. And part of the offer was, the good news was they found a position in marketing for me. The bad news was I was living in San Diego and I had to move. And so I moved from San Diego, signed a 2-year deal to go to Rochester, New York. Now just imagine the weather, San Diego to Rochester, New York. It doesn't get more polar opposite than that. I mean, it was so bad that my first 6 months in Rochester, when I drove my car out there, I lived on a plow street, didn't realize it. And I'd left my car on the street in a snowstorm, and it literally got plowed away the next morning. Ended up on the neighbor's yard, upside down in a big snow pile, buried. And of course, they're all laughing at me that I left my car on the street, the rookie from California. So my indoctrination. But the good news of all this was I was put on the Malcolm Baldrige team. It was a 10-person team at Xerox that was assigned to steal market share back from the Asian market that was stealing them in the small copier division. So I was part of a 10-person team to design a marketing plan, a full sales funnel plan, and an implementation plan out in the field to all 63 districts of Xerox. And so they tapped me in the team because of my selling skills and organizational skills to be the deployment of the sales plan. And so I helped with the team of 10, again, it was 10 people. And I was by far, I say this, dumbest person in the room, because I think everybody had at least one PhD, if not a couple of them in that room. They're all scientists, really smart people. And here I am flopping in there with my chemistry degree from San Diego State, no PhD, no degree in marketing or anything like that. and I'm here on this team. And we all work together to devise a really great uh, plan that coupled with a sales plan. So tying marketing and sales together. So it was my first time seeing why marketing and sales needs to work together and not point fingers at us and them. And by doing that, we were able to steal market share back from the Asian market. And it was a success for Xerox. If you look at their stock, they really jumped stock that year. So when I joined, Xerox stock was $22 a share. When I left, it was 160 some dollars a share. That's how much an increase it was because of that market. So right place, right time for me to go from a top salesperson into a marketing position. And that's kind of how I cut my teeth in marketing and really become a seasoned salesperson that understands how leads get generated and why it's so important to follow up on those leads with many different types of processes that are important versus just having a great salesperson. And we can talk more about that later. But that's kind of my story at Xerox. And from there, I left there and went to Kinko's. And we can talk a little bit more at Kinko's story. But I actually was hired by a gentleman named Paul Orfala, who was Mr. Kinko, because he had dark, kinky hair. That was his nickname out of UC Santa Barbara. And that's how the stores got their name, from Paul's hair. And most people don't know that. And he owned a Xerox 8200 that he got a special cord that was 12 to 13 feet long, so he could plug it into his garage, roll up the door, and roll it out onto the street so people could make copies at UC Santa Barbara. That's really how Kinko started. Most people don't realize he started in a little house with a garage and a machine with a special cord, because it's a 220 volt, to plug in like an old appliance plug to get the company started. Humble beginnings for that company. If you look at them now, they're FedEx office. But that's another great story for that. And so from there, I actually launched, when I left Kinko's, I launched into my own career, really, Gerson and Associates, and been doing that ever since. And so we're basically sales and marketing consultants, not an agency. It's me and my partner, Chris, who's very well known, and we help companies grow. But sales process is probably one of the most important things that most companies forget. And I'll kind of stop there, Gary, and let you ask some more questions, because like I mentioned, I could go on for a while about some of those stories.
No, I think that's really interesting stuff. I know, kind of, we were talking before even we went live here, just that even what Kinko's used to do before they became the office type of or printing type of company that people knew them from, and I guess now their FedEx office, is that the actual name of the what they've merged
FedEx
into?
Office
So they
is
don't.
the official name of Kinko's now, just FedEx Office with a completely different logo. Colors are similar to what Kinko's had, but a completely different logo. But yeah, would you like me to share more about the Kinko story and kind of their morph into who they are today?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, very interesting story. So when I went to go work for them, there was 13 locations here in San Diego. There was, hundreds of locations throughout the United States. And the biggest profit centers, believe it or not, were San Diego County and Houston, Texas. And so my choices were go to Houston, or excuse me, Dallas, Texas, not Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth area, or stay in San Diego. After living in Rochester for 2 years, you can kind of figure out what my decision was. Stay in San Diego. So enjoy the weather. Not Dallas is a cool place. I like Dallas Fort Worth area, but just love San Diego so much more since it's kind of been my alma mater and I've been here for a long time. And they had a store downtown that was 1,000 square feet, which was the typical Kinko store. Think of a long rectangular bay. That's usually what they rented out. And they had a few analog copy machines in there, a few self-service machines up front. They did some shipping with both UPS and FedEx back then. So both, they would ship either company, and some post office stuff. If you paid enough, they'd drive it over to the post office and ship through the post office. And that was really the preface at Kinko's. And they were doing mostly prof notes. And what prof notes were in the beginning for Paul, especially in the early days of UC Santa Barbara, was if you had like class, let's say you had a business admin class at UC Santa Barbara, or mechanical engineering, which they're famous for up there at that school. And your professor was Professor John, and he used this textbook and had these notes every semester for his class. Well, Kinko's actually reprinted those professors' notes, put them in little slots on a wall, and you just go look up. You'd walk in as a student, look up your professor, your major, your professor, and grab those notes and pay for the copies. And they just keep replenishing those in there for each student. And so that was their business, was professors' notes. Unfortunately, all those copies were pieces of textbooks that were in there with the professor's notes, previous students' notes that they this professor authorized to put in there. And they ended up in a giant national lawsuit for copyright infringement. And guess who was pushing the lawsuit? Not the schools, everybody guesses, not the students. Obviously, they wanted the notes, the publishers. The publishers amassed together, I forget who the major publisher were, sued Kinko's for copyright infringement. It took 7 years of courts to get through that. And during that time, Kinko's decided to reinvent itself. And that's actually when I got hired in. So I was there after the professor notes were going in. So this 1,000 square foot store downtown was a hybrid college notes and then some lawyer copy. And they did a lot of stuff for small law firms that had to copy all these weird side sheets for court cases. And that was really their business. And so we had 2 machines where I had 2 employees all day long just unstapling stuff for lawyers and putting them on the glass, hit one, another one. It takes all day to copy one box, one 8.5 by 11 box of paperwork. And we charged a lot for that service. But they wanted to go digital. So I brought the digital part of Xerox. And what I didn't say while I was at Xerox, they went from analog to digital. This is when their DocuText series of machines, which are now in all different sizes. I call them like the $1 million machines because the full digital one hooked up to an AS400 computer back then. Now they hook up to PCs. With all the attachments was about $1 million with payments. If you took all the payments out for the lifetime of the product, it would equate to about $1 million. That includes the service and everything. And so Kinko's decided they want to go digital. So we brought that equipment into Kinko's. I talked the owners into bringing several pieces of that. So we put 7 of these machines here in San Diego. We put the first 4 downtown, started advertising to strictly businesses downtown. And we grew the store from 1,000 square feet to 10,000 square feet. Imagine that, 10 times for all this digital equipment. Then we invited, put a big PR piece out, invited all the businesses, including restaurant groups in the area, which there are tons of restaurants. Our downtown was doing what lots of downtowns were doing back then, revitalizing downtown to the way you see San Diego now. It wasn't like that back then, but it was getting like that. They only had one street with all the nice restaurants, and now it's the whole downtown area. It just migrated over. And we provided a business atmosphere. So this event was a huge kickoff. We had lights like it was a Hollywood event outside going in the sky. We had golden tickets to get in. I mean, we really produced a huge event for this. And we had business leaders, press show up. And what we did is I designed this little demo that we had done at Xerox in the digital room back in Rochester. And what we had done is we contracted somebody in Ireland that was at Xerox that I knew, somebody in England, somebody in New York, and somebody in St. Louis to be on camera back then in an AT&T camera conference room. Much different, Gary, than what we're doing now with Zoom. This, you had to pay a lot of money and go to a special room to get on camera. So we brought the cameras into our demo room at Kinko's downtown because it was 3 blocks away, the AT&T building. And they, with a lot of money, offered to do this for us. And we showed the guy in Ireland showing the headline of the newspaper that day in Ireland. And we had the same person do that in every city that we had contracted with. And we had them digitally scan those on a scanner, and the whole crowd, press were watching this. You think about this. This was 1993, 94, right in there. Digital wasn't a big thing then. No one even knew what email was back then. You think about it back then. We've come so far in such a short period of time, technology-wise. And all these headlines were scanned. They arrived at the machine digitally. We manipulated them into a 24-page book with 5 tabs for each section. And on the back, we had a hand drawn of a picture of somebody's hand. And then across the top that it said, "Technology is now in your hands." And we printed these books complete with the tabs, the front and back cover, hot off the press. It was glue bound, so the glue was hot. We made sure we put them in someone's hand so they could feel the heat. And we turned them upside down on purpose so they could see the hand with "Technologies now in your hands." And that launched Kinko's into the digital age. It cut the headlines here in San Diego. It went across the country. It did so well. We expanded, obviously, Dallas-Fort Worth next into 10,000 square foot stores. And now that's the footprint that you basically see for a Kinko store, somewhere between 7 and 10,000 square feet across the country, away from their humble roots of the 1,000 square foot store, which was the big store. Paul's idea was to do this and grow this with his board and sell it to an entity to be interested. The first offer they got, believe it or not, was from UPS. UPS made an offer. Kinko's kind of turned it down, and FedEx came in with a much better offer, and that's how they ended up being with FedEx. and it became FedEx's property and ownership over a 2-year period where they morphed all the stores into FedEx Office over time, including all the TV promotion and PR that they had done with that. Now you're thinking, boy, that's too bad for UPS. Well, not so bad for UPS because they bought my other customer here in San Diego, Mailbox, etc. So Mailbox, etc. turned into the UPS store. That's who they are now. So that used to be a Mailbox, etc., which was my other client. So was I lucky? Yeah, right place, right time, having Kinko's here in Southern California headquartered and Mailbox, etc., and helping both those companies exit plan out was a great position to be in for sales and marketing, to be able to help those companies with teams of people. Grant you, it took teams of us to do this, to make those sales. But that's the Kinko story. And that's kind of what they're at today. They're the juggernaut of the what we call the small office, home office.
No, I love it. Stuff you just really don't even think about in terms of like the history of some of these companies. So I guess if we can maybe kind of shift gears here, because I know you've mentioned it a little bit. When it comes to these sales processes, I mean, you're talking about $1 million machines at Xerox. How do you deal with these lengthy processes that I'm assuming take at least months? I'm sure you're not picking up the phone and they're saying, hey, are you interested in a AM 500 or a DocuHub, or names I'm just going to butcher, but and they say, you know what, actually, yeah, ours are getting run down. I'll take 3, come on later this afternoon and put them in. Could you kind of speak to what those type of sales process and how you manage that without kind of dropping the ball along the way?
Sure. That actually goes back to my training at Xerox. They were really good about process. One thing they drilled into your brain in that one-on-one training, and by the way, if you failed the training, you got fired on the spot at their training center in Virginia. Literally, I watched people get escorted out of the classroom. Nice to see you, never see you again. They literally weren't even on the campus that afternoon. They put them on a plane and shipped them out. So you had to know your stuff. And that's why they say anybody that graduated from Xerox back then, that's why a lot of companies seek those type of salespeople, because they have that basic consulting process training that just doesn't fail. It's successful time and time again. And there's been many books written about sales after that. They all follow this similar process using different words. And that process basically, as you mentioned, Gary, does it take months? Well, if it was a 2-month sales cycle most of the time, you and I might not be sitting here. I'd be on an island somewhere, maybe a couple islands that I purchased going forward. No one's cutting $1 million checks or even $250,000 checks like that. It's a process. And really what it takes is the salesperson themselves have to understand that they're not really selling, they're consulting, giving advice, becoming a resource for that entity, knowing that this entity may take up to 18 months to close the deal, 18 months, year and a half. And it's the long game. And if you're not prepared for the long game, then you're going to lose right from the beginning. And in that 18 months, there's a lot of process that you have to conduct, one step to the other. And if you skip a step or two, you could obliterate your entire 18 months that you've worked so hard for. That's one. So you need to have patience and fortitude to make it in those kind of sales. The other is, when you're doing enterprise type sales, is you have to know who the key players are at the company. And cross your fingers, because you know what's going to happen. One of your key players, maybe one of your key influencers, is going to leave, either get promoted laterally within the company, no longer an influencer, or get an upward promotion to another company during your sales cycle. So the average tenure was 2 to 4 years at a corporation back then. You can imagine with an 18-month sales cycle, you're right in that window of change. And so the key was figuring out who the key players were and figuring out who the key players might be during your sales cycle, so you could actually preempt who might come in and make sure that they're more a friendly than a non-friendly in your process. The real short circuit way to talk about this is when you go into a company, you have your gatekeepers. Everybody talks about the person up front that's got to get you connected to somebody else. There's a process for how to become good friends with the gatekeeper, how to show them respect, which a lot of reps may or may not do because they don't think much of the gatekeeper. They don't realize how hard those people work to do what they do and really what they're instructed to do. So we learned early on from Xerox, as they showed you in the process, to show respect for every single person you dealt with in your process, because each one of them is as important as the person writing the check, which we call AK decision maker, right? Decision maker is the person that writes the check, authorizes the payment, or cuts it themselves. And that's the key that you're looking for. But in consultant sales, you're amassing an army of influencers to the decision makers. So just in case that decision maker is not quite sure, yes or no, they're on the fence. That army screaming at them of their employees saying, we want this, makes it very hard for them to say no. And I've been in several situations where the person in charge that was the actual person that wrote the check, the decision maker authorized it, wasn't keen on the idea, but I had amassed 10 or 12 individual employees underneath that person that was, they would have been in very bad political shape had they said no to their entire team. And so that's one of the techniques that Xerox teaches you in the process that I now to impart in companies, whether the cycle's short or long, understanding who the players are at their potential client, how important those players are, and what role they play in your process and what role they play in the company. So you understand the entire thing. And that shows respect too to the person that you're trying to get to when you finally get there to talk to them, that you understand their business, their competitors, and their company versus just being another salesperson. You become a resource.
So when you're kind of like working with all these influencers and gatekeepers, did you kind of have a specific strategy for each of them about, because I assume you're also dealing with a lot of different personalities during something like this
You are.
to
You are.
try
You
and,
get personalities are all over the spectrum. And so you have a playbook. And so I used to have a playbook that I'd open it up, it'd have the account name, it'd have the structure of the company, their actual organizational structure. Even if most people didn't even know what it was in the company, I'd start mapping it out after asking questions. It's the first thing they trained us to do. Once I understood the organizational structure, then I looked at who I was currently dealing with, where they were in the organizational structure, and figured out where the decision maker might be if I didn't know already. And then how many players I'd have to interact with and who those players might be along that, 9 to 18 month sales cycle that I'd mentioned earlier. And so that playbook became the institution of how you're going to go after that account. And of course, that playbook, like any playbook and like any plans, and you've read some of these great books, it's like the best plans. Once you go in contact with the customer, they just all go out the door. And so you have to constantly be planning and rejiggering your plans as things change in the field. But without that starting format, you're going to be lost in your head on who's who do I have to talk to, and then even personal details about each person. Are they have a family? What are their values? So you can find common ground. What are their likes and dislikes? You need to know this about every key player that you're selling up to. So it isn't as simple as I know John or I know Mary. It's I know Mary's got 3 kids. She's been married for 30 years. Her and her husband love to go here on vacation. And so when I talk to Mary, who's the gatekeeper, she knows I generally care and understand who she is and what her role is, not only personally, but in the company. So it's very important you know them personally, as well as know what's going on in the business for them as well. And you got to remember when you're selling, not every employee is a happy go lucky camper at that company. And so you have to play between the political lines as you navigate between all these people to get to the right person.
it sounds, as you're saying that, I'm just like picturing, like an FBI type of thing where you have a dossier on each person and you got like a big thing on the wall of them and saying, all right, so that's not the boss. How do we get to the boss? Type of thing, trying to piece together the puzzle of, in this case, the sale or of the who done it or whatnot. But,
Yeah, actually, Gary, you're not far off. Your top 5 accounts, you literally had to draw them up on a whiteboard for management when I was at Xerox and show them what you understood about the account. Not from your 8.5 by 11 playbook. You had to draw it up there without looking at your playbook. They want to know if you knew it in your head, besides on paper, that you owned those top 5 accounts. Because Xerox knew if you could close 2 to 4 of those top 5 accounts, they would make their budgets rolling up to the district budget.
so when it came to developing new accounts, because I assume you didn't really start, or correct me if I'm wrong, but did you? I assume you didn't start with any accounts. I don't, but I guess maybe you did. But when it came to trying to get those new meetings, what are some of the techniques you used to get them, or what lengths did you go to I guess maybe get some of these meetings?
Oh, I got some good stories there. I'll go back to my Xerox selling days. A little different now. Techniques are a little different today because of all the technology, but pre-massive technology. And I think back, let's see, then I did have a mobile phone, but it was one of the bigger, awkward, no smartphones back then. It was just a regular straight phone. It's pre-BlackBerry days, to give you an idea of what cell phone technology. I was one of the few people that had one in my car back then. I had a mounted one. If people remember that, cell phones were mounted in your car back in the beginning. They weren't, unless you got a transportable one that unlocked that looked like a brick about this big that you'd carry with a handle with a handset on your head. That was the transportable ones, but I had the fully mounted ones back then. How did I prospect? So there were some accounts given that you had to manage in a territory, but you would have trouble making your budget if that's all that you were working on. That's usually about half of your budget they calculate is the accounts that you're given to manage. It's the other half you have to go out and get. And so my territory was all of San Diego County, and it was called the print for pay market, meaning that anybody that printed on a piece of medium and then sold that to somebody else, they call that print for pay. So Kinko's would print for pay, right? You go in there, consumer goes in, they get some copies, they pay for the copies. That's print for pay. So I was mostly dealing with what they call the offset printers, the big presses and the printing that was not a copy machine. And Xerox hadn't really broken into that market. They really wanted it bad. And I just come from that market. That's what my parents did for a living. They were in the print for pay market. And so I kind of understood it from that standpoint. And so Xerox was very suit and tie. 3-piece or 2-piece suit was their dress code. You actually got a book about this thick with the dress code. It's back in the days when IBM had to wear sock suspenders as part of their dress code. I remember reading my buddy who worked for IBM. We didn't have to wear sock suspenders, but it was that detailed. Can you believe it or not? Can you imagine giving this to somebody today? What kind of lawsuit that throw off? It'd just be crazy, right? Besides wearing the Chuck E. Cheese uniform where they can't tell you to wear sock suspenders. I mean, it's just crazy unless it's really part of their uniform. And then you were only allowed to wear a red tie if you're going out closing that day. So we always knew who was closing deals in the morning meetings of sales because they had red ties on, or the women had red sachets or something red on their clothing. It was very much color coded back then. It was really interesting. I can't even imagine any of this flying today in HR if you really had some of these things in place. But saying that, it was really interesting with how they processed all this. Is it kept you very focused on what you needed to do. And so for prospecting, what I did, instead of wearing all that suit and tie, print shops did not salute to the guy driving up in the Mercedes, like the insurance guy in a full 3-piece suit. Owners may have been okay with that, but not the guys in the back that were making the biggest influence on the owner to buy this equipment, right? And so what I would do is I'd go out in my kind of okay average car. I had a change of clothes downstairs, so I had to show up at Xerox every morning in my suit for my first morning meeting before out the door at 8 o'clock. And then I would go downstairs in my car and change clothes in my car into my jeans, my polo shirt, and my brown loafer shoes. And I would use those to go into the back door of all the print shops in San Diego. So I entered through the back door, not the front door, and talked to the guys in the binding department, in the shipping department, made friends with everybody in the back, and worked my way to the front, just like I was taught at Xerox, instead of trying to come through the front door. So by the time I got to the decision makers, they already knew who I was, that I'd been in the shop for quite some time, and all the things I was doing that had really, in their mind, not a lot to do with sales, but investigating into their productivity, looking at their competition and their customers and how I could help them actually generate more revenue was my approach. And I had a playbook for that, just for that print for pay market, that I used over and over again to be successful. And so I was very successful at turning accounts that Xerox had never spoken to buying equipment. That's how I sold 11.2 million in 1 year. So it took me 2.5 years of prospecting those deals to get the actual purchases down the line.
That's awesome.
That's just one example. I can give you another one that you'll love. This was long after Xerox. I was still selling, and I couldn't get into this one account for the life of me. And every salesperson has this story. They got this media account they want to get into, but just the back door shut, the side door shut, the front door shut. It's like this house is boarded up and you just can't get in no matter what, unless you like mine underground and come up through the bottom, right? For just analogy. And I just couldn't get to this guy that I wanted to talk to. So I found a chocolate company in San Diego County that could make chocolate in any shape you wanted. And they did basically mold injecting with chocolate. So I took my dress shoe down there and had them make a mold after my dress shoe and make a chocolate mold that was full size. And I had them put it in plexiglass. And I sent it to this guy. And this is the cliche of cliches. I said, I'm trying to just get my foot in the door. Will you please just talk to me for 5 minutes? Does this chocolate earn me 5 minutes? And I got a meeting with that. it was so gimmicky and so cliche. Even back then, the guy says, I got to at least talk to this guy that took all this effort to make this shoe. And it got me in the door. I never used it again, just the one time. But it's just one of those things. I didn't know what else to try to do. I couldn't network my way in through anybody I knew. And so this was the best chance I had, and it worked. So sometimes off the wall stuff works. You never know.
You literally sent a chocolate shoe.
I'm not proud to say it, but I actually did it. It's
You know,
before
the
the year
marketing-
2000. I would never do that again. I'd probably get shunned on social media forever.
Oh gosh, I love it. I think it's brilliant. I'm trying to think. Can I use that today in 2021?
It might come to the clutter, right?
Yeah, how do I borrow that and do that, since we do a lot of B2B work here, so we're always trying to get into different companies too. So
yeah. By the way, I didn't invent that. I heard about that from somebody else, and that's who turned me on to that chocolator that did the mold injecting, because they had done the same thing with a woman with her women's dress shoe that she had sent out.
Well, I know we're kind of getting up there in time, so I guess for anybody who wants to kind of explore this deeper, I know you guys do a lot of different sales and marketing things. So for anybody who's kind of looking for, some more information about that, what is kind of the best way to get in touch with you, or who should reach out to you, type of thing?
Sure. Yeah. Any company that's looking to connect their leads, I call marketing, right? That's what Chris and I do well, is drive lead generation, demand generation leads. They already got an engine, great. Connecting that to an actual sales funnel, because we all know that 80% of the leads you generate don't close. And those are the ones that are most important to the business long term. And so developing a process to what to do with the 80% that don't close versus the 20% that are going to close anyway is really what makes a company successful or not. And Chris and I have an uncanny way of developing and showing those processes that I was kind of describing earlier, what to do once you get that lead in the door, and then take it all the way through to close and track it so you know exactly what your metrics are for sales. And it helps you with projections moving forward. Also helps you know when the company is going to have a slowdown or a speed up based on how many leads are in the pipeline in your process. And so those are the kind of companies that are great to talk to us. And Chris and I, for free, we'll talk to any company. Cost, just call us up and we'll shoot the gab and give you what we think, and then it's up to you from there what you'd like to do. We're a pretty low pressure kind of company. To get a hold of us, the best way is you can go to our website. It's www.r, as my first initial, Randy, GersonAssociates.com. So rgersonassociates.com. You can email me at randy@rgersonassociates.com. Or if you're really aggressive and you want to just call me, I'll give you my cell number. It's 619-851-0265. Feel free to call me, text me. I pretty much answer just about anything. Happy to talk to other professionals in the field that do the same thing I do. Always great to share stories and gain knowledge and become better as a community at what we do.
Well, I love it. Well, we'll make sure we share, your website in the show notes, Randy@rgersonassociates.com. Check him out, give him a call, send him a text. Absolutely. Randy, thanks so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time.
Gary, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I hope the audience enjoyed it, and wish everybody a safe and a happy day.
All right. Take care, Randy. Thanks.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Pipelineology podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and look forward to seeing you on the next one. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.